Hello, my name is Carrie Brown and I'm with the Central Mississippi Regional Library System. Today I'm going to be reading to you chapters 3, 4, and 5 of A to Z Mysteries, The Kidnapped King. Written by Ron Roy, illustrated by John Stephen Gurney, published by Random House, New York. Chapter 3. Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose stared at Sammy. What do you mean, who's going to dress you? Dink asked. In my country, my servants dress me and undress me, Sammy said. Yeah, right, Josh said, grinning. And my servants do my homework for me. Do you really have servants? Ruth Rose asked Sammy. Sammy nodded. I have 5 servants of my own. My father has 20. 20 servants? Josh yelled. Are you guys rich? Sammy sat on Dink's bed. We are very rich, he said. My father is... Sammy didn't finish what he was going to say. Instead, he burst into tears. Great, Josh, you made him cry, Dink said. I did not. I just asked him if he was rich. Ruth Rose sat next to Sammy. Why are you crying? She asked. Sammy didn't answer. Big tears rolled down his cheeks. Dink tossed the sweat clothes onto the bed. Then he ran into his room and came out with a wad of tissues. Here, he said. Sammy took the tissues and wiped his eyes. Do you miss your mom and dad? Ruth Rose asked Sammy. Is that why you're crying? Sammy took a deep breath and wiped at his tears. I don't know where my parents are, he said. They were kidnapped last week. Kidnapped? The 3 other kids yelled. Sammy nodded. My father's enemies snuck into the palace and took him and my mother. Palace? Josh said. You live in a palace? What are you, a prince or something? Sammy nodded. Yes, my father is the king of Kostra. I am Prince Samir bin Oz. I will be king someday. Sammy started crying again. No one said anything. Even Loretta stopped running around in her cage. Dink stared at Sammy. You're a prince? He finally asked. Does my mom know all this, Sammy? I mean, about your folks being kidnapped and everything? The boy shook his head. Only my tutor knows, he said. My parents were kidnapped at night. I was sleeping. The next day, I was snuck out of the palace and sent here so I would be safe. Safe from what? Ruth Rose asked. Sammy looked at her. His eyes were red and his nose dripped. From the kidnappers, he said. Just then, Pal started barking from the front porch. They're here, Sammy cried. He jumped off the bed and ran into the bathroom. Dink looked out the window. Pal was barking at a car. It was a taxi. Dink watched it turn the corner and disappear. Come on out, Sammy, Dink said. It was just your tutor leaving. Sammy stepped out of the bathroom. His eyes looked scared. I am sorry, he whispered. No problem, Dink said. Why don't we go down and play? He pointed to the sweat clothes on the bed. Do you really need help getting dressed? Sammy took a deep breath and grinned. No, I am in America now. I will learn to dress myself. While Sammy changed, the other kids went outside and tossed the Nerf ball in Dink's backyard. It must be so cool to be a prince, Josh said. Just imagine ordering all those servants around. Dink bopped him with the Nerf ball. Josh, Sammy doesn't care about all that stuff, he said. He misses his parents. I know, Josh said, but still, just think. He could get ice cream in the middle of the night by snapping his fingers. Sammy came out dressed in Dink's sweat clothes. Pal, tied to a tree, tried to lick Sammy's foot as he walked by. Sammy jumped out of reach. Is he trying to bite me? He asked. Josh laughed. No, he's just saying hi, he said. Pal wouldn't hurt a flea. Go ahead, pet him. Sammy stepped closer and gave Pal a pat on his head. Then he sneezed. I like him, Sammy said, but I am still allergic. The kids taught Sammy the rules of touch football. They played until Dink's mother called them in to eat. Promising to come over the next morning, Josh untied Pal and headed for home. Bye, Sammy, Ruth Rose said. She cut through the hedge to her house next door. Your friends are nice, Sammy said. Do you play together every day? Sure, Dink said. Don't you play with your friends in that place you come from? Sammy shook his head. I have no friends. I stay in the palace and study with my tutors. No friends? Dink stared at Sammy. He couldn't imagine not having Josh and Ruth Rose to hang out with. We better go wash up, Dink said, looking at his dirty hands. I hope you like burgers and fries. Burgers and fries? Sammy said. What is burgers and fries? Dink grinned. Hamburgers and French fries. French fries are skinny little potato slices. You dip them in ketchup. Sammy let out a sigh. Okay, I will try your food. Who will taste it for me? Taste it? Dink asked. Why? In my country, Sammy explained, my father's enemies tried to poison him. He has a servant taste our food to make sure it is safe. Dink grinned at Sammy. My mom's a real good cook. She doesn't use much poison at all. Sammy's eyes bugged out. You're making a joke, right? Yeah, Dink said, but we have to tell her the truth about you, okay? Why? Sammy asked. Because it's the way we do things, Dink said. Don't worry, you're safe here. Nobody will get you in Greenlawn. Chapter 4. During supper, Dink and Sammy told Dink's mom the real reason why Sammy was in the United States. Oh, Sammy, Dink's mom said, I am so sorry. Thank you for telling me. After they all had some ice cream, Dink and his mother helped Sammy unpack. Dink's mother held up a long wooden box decorated with gold. This is heavy, Sammy. What's inside? She asked. Sammy opened the lid and took out a shiny kaleidoscope. Its golden sides were encrusted with jewels. This kaleidoscope has been in my family for many years, Sammy explained. It belonged to my grandfather's grandfather and his grandfather. Now it is my father's. What a lovely idea, Dink's mother said. Will the kaleidoscope belong to you someday? On my 15th birthday, my father will give this to me, Sammy said. He frowned. At least he would have, but now, I don't know what will happen. Dink felt badly for Sammy. He couldn't imagine what he would feel like if his parents ever got kidnapped. Dink's mother sat on the bed next to Sammy. She took his hand. Sammy, I'm sure your parents will be found soon, she said. Didn't you tell us that your father's friends are searching every corner of your country? Sammy nodded. But his enemies are clever, he said. They may have taken my parents far away from Kostra. Dink's mother gave Sammy a hug. Then she laid his pajamas and slippers on his bed. The PJs were red silk, and the slippers were purple velvet with floppy gold tassels. Pretty snazzy, Dink said, grinning at Sammy. I usually sleep in an old t-shirt and shorts. Just then the front doorbell rang. Dink's mother left the room. Watch, Sammy said, kneeling on the floor. He unscrewed the large end of the kaleidoscope and poured out all the pieces of glass. They made a red, yellow, and blue mound on the rug. It comes apart? Dink said. He picked up some of the glass. The thin pieces felt smooth in his fingers. A knock came at the door to Sammy's room. Joan Clinker poked her head in. Hi, Sammy, she said. Sammy smiled and scooped up the glass. I'm showing Dink my kaleidoscope, he said. Dink helped Sammy put the kaleidoscope back in its box. Fine, Sammy, Joan said, looking at her watch. It's almost 8. How about a short French lesson? She dropped a yellow book on Sammy's bed. Will you excuse Sammy for a little while? She said to Dink. Can't he stay? Sammy asked. Dink can have a lesson with me. Joan Clinker looked at Dink for a moment, then said, Sure, why not? Great, Dink said. He sat next to Sammy on the floor. Joan perched on the bed and opened the yellow book. First, some colors, Joan said. She pointed at Dink's shirt. Blue. But in French, we say bleu. Repeat, Sammy. Sammy said blue. To Dink, it sounded almost the same as blue. Joan pointed at Dink. Now you, please. Blue? Said Dink, trying to imitate Sammy. Good. Joan put a hand on Sammy's folded pajamas. Red, she said. Rouge, said Sammy. To Dink, it sounded almost like rouge, so that's what he said. Joan Clinker held up the yellow book. Jaune, she said. Le livre est jaune. The book is yellow. She pointed at Dink. Can you say jaune? Dink blushed. Joan? He finally said. No, Joan is my name, the tutor said. Dink tried again. Zone? He said. Sammy laughed. That's okay, he said. It took me a month to learn how to say jaune. Now we will do some numbers, Joan said. A half hour later, she closed the yellow book. That's all for tonight, said. Tomorrow we will continue. She checked the locks on Sammy's window, his bathroom door, and the door out in the hall. Then she turned and smiled. Bonsoir, Sammy. Bonsoir, madame, Sammy answered. After Joan left, Dink stood up and yawned. Night, Sammy. I'll wake you up for breakfast. Dink headed into the bathroom and brushed his teeth. He smiled at his reflection in the mirror. Tomorrow, he decided, he'd learn how to say, my toothbrush is purple, in French. Chapter 5. The next morning, Dink washed his hands and face, then tapped on Sammy's bedroom door. Rise and shine, Dink said. We're having pancakes and sausages for breakfast. There was no answer. Dink opened the door and peeked in. Sammy's bed was mussed, but he wasn't in it. Sammy? Dink said, glancing around the empty room. Where could he be? Dink wondered as he headed down the stairs. Mom, Sammy's not in his room, Dink said. Dink's mother stopped spooning pancake batter into a frying pan. He's not. Where is he? I don't know, Mom. Dink shoved open the back door and looked around the yard. Not out here either, he said. As Dink pulled the door shut again, his hand struck something sharp. Mom, look at this, he yelled. The wood around the door lock was shattered. Jagged slivers of wood stuck out. A few wood splinters lay on the floor under Dink's feet. Oh my goodness, his mother said. Someone forced the door open. She turned and hurried up the hall stairs. Dink followed his mom into the guest room. Sammy, his mom called. Sammy, please answer. If you're hiding, please come out. But Sammy did not answer. I'm calling Officer Fallon, Dink's mother said, and Joan Clinker. Why don't you run next door and find out if Ruth Rose's family saw anything? Dink charged down the stairs and out of the house. He tore into Ruth Rose's yard and banged his fist on her door. Ruth Rose opened it, munching on a piece of toast. Have you seen Sammy? Dink asked out of breath. She shook her head. Why, is he missing? Yes, Dink said. Someone broke in. Sammy's gone. What? Ruth Rose yelled. You mean he was kidnapped? Suddenly Dink heard a siren. He left Ruth Rose with the toast in her hand and raced back to his front yard. A police cruiser roared around the corner and whipped into his driveway. As the siren died, Officer Fallon and King burst out of the car. Dink's mom came flying out of the house. Her face was white. Thank goodness you came, she told the officers. I think our house guest has been kidnapped. Just then, a yellow taxi pulled up in front of Dink's house. The rear door flew open and Joan Clinker climbed out. What has happened to Sammy? She called, running across the front yard. We don't know, Dink's mother said. He's not in the house, and the lock on our back door had been forced open. Joan Clinker put her hand to her mouth. She swayed, then started to topple. Officer King caught her just before she fell. Bring her inside, Dink's mother said, running for the front door. Take a look around, Officer Fallon told Officer Keene. Then he helped Dink's mother take Joan Clinker into the house. Ruth Rose appeared through the hedge that separated their yards. She was dressed in blue bib overalls, a blue shirt, and blue high-top sneakers. Is Sammy really gone? She asked Dink. This isn't a joke, is it? Dink shook his head. His mouth was so dry he could hardly swallow. I think it's real, he said, remembering what Sammy had told them about his father's enemies. But how could anyone just walk in and take him? Ruth Rose asked. Our back door is busted, Dink said. They must have gotten in that way. Ruth Rose's mom and dad joined them as Dink explained. Let's all search the street, Ruth Rose's dad suggested. He went to organize the neighbors. Just then, Josh arrived with his dog. What's going on, Dinkus? He asked. Why is the cruiser here? Sammy is gone, Dink said. We think he's been kidnapped. Josh's mouth dropped open, then he grinned. This is a joke, right? Dink shook his head. Come on, I'll show you where the kidnappers broke into the kitchen door. Dink started off for the front steps, but before he reached the door, it opened. Joan Clinker and Dink's mother stepped out. Are you sure you're all right, Joan? Dink's mother asked. Won't you stay for a while? Joan Clinker shook her head. I have to make some phone calls, she muttered. Then she hurried into the cab and it pulled away. That poor woman, Dink's mom said, heading back to the kitchen. As Dink climbed the porch steps, something shiny caught his eye. He bent down and picked up a small piece of yellow glass. What's that? Ruth Rose asked. Dink stared at the yellow sliver. He remembered where he'd seen others just like it. This came out of Sammy's kaleidoscope, he said. Thank you. Be sure to tune in next week for chapters 6, 7, and 8. Goodbye.